Man was at the post office and he was at one of the desks addressing an envelope when an older gentleman walked up to him and asked, "Can you help me?" The man said, "Sure." He said, "I don't write very well. Could you address this postcard for me?" And the man said, "Absolutely." And so the older gentleman dictated the address to him. He wrote it down. And he finished, and the older man asked, "Could you do one more thing for me?" And the man said, "Sure, name it." He said, "Could you flip it over to the other side and just write a few thoughts for me?" And the man said, "Sure." And so the older gentleman dictated to him what he wanted him to write, and the man wrote it out. He finished, and the man looked at the older gentleman, and he said, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" And the older gentleman said, "Yes, could you put P.S., sorry for the sloppy handwriting?" Have you ever done something nice for someone, and instead of them saying thank you and being appreciative, they instead complain or they gripe? You ever held the door open for someone and they never said thank you? You let someone out in front of you in traffic and they don't give you the courtesy wave? You ever been to a convenience store and you walk up and the cashier has nothing to say to you? She's too busy talking with someone else, never acknowledges you. You make the transaction, she never says thank you. You know, we expect gratitude, at least on the other end, don't we? But if I'm going to be honest, I have to admit that I can fall prey of being an ungracious person at times. I can fall prey to expecting certain things and being self-centered rather than expressing gratitude on my own. For instance, you ever been in the grocery store line and you've got 2 items and there's somebody in front of you with a cart full of groceries totaling probably $500, and you're sitting there in your mind going, "What a selfish person. If they would just let me cut in front of them, I've only got 2 items." And you're sitting there, you're going over this in your head, and you're getting madder and madder, and then the person turns around and goes, "Oh, why don't you go ahead?" And you say, "Are you sure? I mean, I'm fine. I'm not in any hurry." Here you've stabbed that person over and over again in your mind, and then they turn around and they show an expression of gratitude or politeness to let you go ahead of them. Now, I think we all expect gratitude. There's a certain expectation that comes when we hold the door open for someone or we allow someone to cut in front of us in line. So imagine what Jesus must have felt in Luke chapter 17 when he heals 10 men who are afflicted with the horrible disease of leprosy, and only one of them says thank you. Look with me in verse 11. Luke chapter 17. It says, "While he was on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 leprous men who stood at a distance met him, and they raised their voices, saying, 'Jesus, Master, have mercy on us.' When he saw them, he said to them, 'Go and show yourselves to the priest.' And as they were going, they were cleansed. Now one of them, when he saw that he had been healed, turned back, glorifying God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at his feet, giving thanks to him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered and said, 'Were there not 10 cleansed? But the 9, where are they? Was no one found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner?' And he said to him, 'Stand up and go. Your faith has made you well.'" It's significant that the hero of this story is a Samaritan. We've talked about it before, about how the Jews viewed Samaritans. They were half-breeds. They were good for nothing. They were worthless. They had nothing to contribute to society. But here is Jesus on the border between Galilee and Samaria, and these 10 men who are suffering from leprosy meet him seeking healing. What's interesting is, it doesn't matter what the race or ethnicity or nationality of any of these people are, because they're all suffering from the same thing. Who cares if he's a Samaritan? He's just as outcast as a Jew at this point. They're all suffering from the same disease. They're all exiled from society. It doesn't matter what his race or nationality is, right? They all have a common bond with the disease of leprosy. A disease that would cause oozing lumps all over your body. Your hands and feet would deteriorate. Your nose would eventually fall off. These men were also suffering socially and emotionally. Have you ever considered when you read this story that these men might have had families? That they might have been married and had children? And because of their disease, they're ostracized from the community. They're set apart. They're at a distance from their family, from society, because they are suffering not only physically, but also emotionally, socially. And so they come to Jesus seeking healing. And He gives it to them. Now, how would you feel if you had been cut off from your family, cut off from your wife and your children, while you dealt with such a treacherous disease? How would you feel if that was gone in one fell swoop? How would you feel that all of a sudden you were restored, you were back to normal, everything was fine, you could go back home? Certainly you'd be grateful, wouldn't you? Well, if all 10 of them were grateful, only one of them showed it. This lowly, half-breed, despised, worthless Samaritan was the only one who came back and expressed gratitude. You see, the account of the 10 lepers is really deeper than just 10 men getting healed from a terrible disease. The Jews were entitled people. They believed because they belonged to God and they were His chosen, that they had certain rights and privileges that other people didn't, including the Samaritans. And so you see that interwoven within this story, right? Why go back and ask God, or why go back and tell God, I'm thankful? Why go back and tell Jesus, thank you very much? Why? I'm due this. I'm entitled to this. I'm God's chosen people, right? But the Samaritan, this foreigner, is the one who expresses extreme gratitude by falling at the feet of Jesus and saying thank you. This was indicative of the Jews, not giving thanks because they felt that they deserved it. Notice what is written just above this account, starting in verse 7. It says, which of you, having a slave plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, come immediately and sit down and eat? But will he not say to him, prepare something for me to eat, and properly clothe yourself and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you may eat and drink? He does not thank the slave because he did the things which were commanded, does he? So you too, when you do all the things which are commanded, you say, we are unworthy slaves. We have done only that which we ought to have done. I want to ask you a question this morning. Are you a diva or are you a debtor? You know what a diva is, right? A diva is someone, mostly applies to ladies in our culture. It's a lady who feels entitled. A lady who feels that she deserves certain things, and if she doesn't get them, she's going to stomp her feet and throw a fit. We've seen diva applied to women most often, but I know a lot of men who are divas as well. And you probably do too. They expect certain things. They feel entitled. They're spoiled rotten. Humble and gracious are not usually terms that apply to a diva. But a debtor is someone different. A debtor understands that he owes everything to someone else. He's not entitled to anything. In fact, he's just grateful for anything that he gets. A debtor is one who is a slave. And that's what Jesus is talking about here leading up to the 10 lepers episode. The reason the master doesn't thank the servant is because the master is not under obligation. That's what verses 7 through 10 are talking about. He doesn't thank the slave because he's the master. You can't get those roles reversed. There's an order here. It's slave master. The slave is subservient to the master. And Jesus is pointing that out. You cannot be entitled here because you are a debtor. And at the end of the day, if you do everything you're supposed to do, you're still a debtor. If you perform every duty that you're supposed to perform, you've only done exactly what you're supposed to do. You don't deserve anything with that. It's my philosophy as a parent, and you may not share this philosophy, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I may be wrong. But my philosophy as a parent, I never gave my kids an allowance for doing their chores like cleaning their room. You messed up your room, you should clean your room. I'm not going to pay you for that. And it's the same situation here. This is your responsibility as a slave. At the end of the day, if you do everything you're supposed to do, you've only done what's required of you. You don't get rewarded for that. We may be good little Christian boys and girls. We may obey God and do exactly what we're supposed to do, but at the end of the day, we're still a debtor. You don't get any special treatment for that. I know that God says that He will bless us if we lovingly obey, but He doesn't have to. He's not obligated to us. We can't put Him into our debt. This is a master-slave relationship, and we have to understand which one we are. We're not the master. He is. You know, if you look again at verse 10, it says, "So you too, when you do all the things which are commanded you, say, 'We are unworthy slaves. We have done only that which we have ought to have done.'" People often chose slavery in the first century in order to pay off their debts. So if they received anything from the master other than what they did on the daily basis that they were supposed to do, it was a gift, because they weren't obligated, the master wasn't, to give them anything other than the day's wages for what they had done. And the same is true with us. God doesn't owe us. You can't put God into your debt. You can't be a diva that says, "Oh, God's got to bless me because I've done all these great things." No. You've only done what you're supposed to do. And you're still a debtor at the end of the day. Were the 9 ungrateful lepers divas? We might could say that. They certainly felt entitled. They certainly felt that they deserved certain blessings from God because they were His chosen people. They were selfish. But here's the one thing that we need to point out. And I think all too often, Christians read this account of the 10 lepers and they assume they're like the Samaritan one, when in actuality, a lot of times we find ourselves more like the other 9. Can we be honest here for just a moment? How much of church, how much of Christianity is me-focused? A lot of it, right? A lot of Christianity, a lot of church is focused on the individual and what I can get out of it rather than what I can give. We could go through several examples, but a me-centered church is full of individuals, like the one that comes in and says, "You're sitting in my pew. You're parked in my parking spot." That's a me-centered church, right? A me-centered church is one that says, "I'm withholding my contribution until the elders do what I think they should do." That's a me-centered church. I hope, folks, you will understand why the elders, why the staff don't have a lot of patience for me-centered Christianity. We see death on a regular basis. Right now we have a long list of folks who are sick and in need. In counseling, we have individuals come through all the time that want to talk about a failed marriage. They're about to lose their job. Their kids are disobedient and they don't know what to do about it. These are the things that we see on a regular basis, so you can forgive us if we don't get all worked up about a misspelling in the bulletin or about your ideologies or your ideas or recommendations maybe not being employed the minute you think they should. You can understand why maybe we don't get all worked up over some of those little things that are really insignificant in the big picture. We're about something bigger here. And it's not you. It's not the individual. It's about God. But so often, we have made church all about the person. And so when we go and shop for a church, we have a list of items on our shopping list. And most often, they're me-centered things. And not the most important things. I hope you understand where I'm coming from, but we don't deserve any of this. All those wonderful blessings that you have in life, you don't deserve any of them. And when they start overriding the blesser, then that's a problem. We don't deserve this wonderful, nice building or the opportunity to build another building to expand so that we have enough room. We don't deserve any of that. We're not entitled to any of this. We're not even entitled to salvation. But thanks be to God that we have that opportunity. We're not the master. We have no right to demand anything but just to say thank you. Thank you, God, for blessing me in so many ways. I think another hindrance to thankfulness is that we just have too much. Are you spoiled? I mean, I think I am, if I'm honest. I think I'm pretty spoiled. We live in a nice community in the buckle of the Bible Belt. We drink bottled water when many in our world are not even having access to fresh drinking water. We come to our beautiful climate-controlled building when there are many in our world who brave the elements just to worship God. We drive back and forth to work and to church when so many have to walk to get anywhere. I mean, we've got a lot. And I think in some ways that makes us spoiled. It makes us not be able to see straight sometimes. I'm not trying to shame us. I mean, we all deal with it. I'm simply stating the fact, and the fact is that we don't often live like slaves. It's hard to answer the bell of slavery when we all live like kings. It's hard to be a slave when we're living like the master. It's hard to relate to being a bondservant when you live like a king or a queen. And that's not to say that we're not thankful for what we have. I'm sure all of us in this room would be thankful if asked, do you believe that God has blessed you and are you grateful for that? Absolutely. But the bottom line is, if you were to lose it all tomorrow, would you still serve God? If you had nothing but your faith in God, would that be enough? Let me ask you, are you thankful for the fact that your clothes might fit a little snug because it means that you have enough to eat? Are you thankful for your shadow because it means that you get to bask in the sunlight? Are you thankful for aching muscles and tired bones at the end of the day because it means that you have a job? Are you thankful for dirty dishes in the sink because it means that you have enough to eat? We tend to only be thankful when things are ideal. Our level of thankfulness is directly proportionate to our level of comfort. So when things are good, we're thankful. When things are not so good, we're asking God why. Not understanding that we are the debtor here, that we didn't deserve any of it to begin with. Listen to what Paul states. He says, I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. The one thing I pick out about this that I really like is the fact that he says, I have learned. That makes me feel good. Because I tend to see Paul as an outlier. I hear what he says, I believe in what he says, but I tend to see him as like a superhero of faith. I can never reach that level, so why try, right? But may I remind you, before Paul was a superhero, he was a villain, right? I mean, he even calls himself the chief of sinners. We're not unlike Paul. And if he can learn the secret of contentment, then I can too. How do you get that education? Well, my guess would be losing it all. As Paul is sitting in a cold, dark, damp prison cell, he's writing these words. He had nothing in the way of material things or stuff or possessions, and yet he is able to say, I have learned the secret of contentment. I've been filled. I've been hungry. And through it all, I have been content because of my faith. If you lost it all, could you still turn and bless God? Now let me pause for a minute and make something very clear. We often look at Christianity through a therapeutic lens, don't we? We tend to see Christianity as how I can make my life better, how I can live my best life now. But folks, that's not what Christianity is. Just read the Bible. You read a lot about people who served God with no external benefits hardly at all. In fact, they suffered persecution. You know, if you listen to our culture and how it molds and shapes Christianity, if Paul were alive today, you'd expect him to be on Oprah talking about his new book. You know, transformed through being in prison, how to have your best life now. And you listen to some of the preachers on TV and it's all about how faith is going to make you better in this life and how if you just have enough faith, you'll have all these blessings. That's not Christianity, folks. That's a cheap imitation. You're the debtor, which means you serve God no matter what the consequence. He's the master. Even if you have nothing, you can be content. If you're placing all of your trust and your faith in the blessings rather than the blesser, where are you going to be at the end of the day? What are you thankful for? Certainly we can come up with a lot of things that we're thankful for. We have been blessed with material things, and certainly we should thank God for that. But that's not what it's all about. I want to offer up 3 things that you should be thankful for every day. Number 1, God has rescued us. Number 2, God sustains us. And number 3, God has a home for us. That's it. Those 3 things can allow you to be thankful each and every day if you're a child of God. God rescued us, God sustains us, and God has a home for us. You know what? I realize that this message may not be well received everywhere I would preach it. And you know why? Because I have a lot of stuff. And it would be easy for an audience somewhere to say, yeah, you have the luxury of preaching this because you have a lot of stuff. There's some people that don't have much at all. But you can be poor and indigent and still feel entitled. You can be wealthy and on top of the world and still be a diva. The key is living like a bondservant no matter what. The key is understanding the master-slave relationship. Like Paul, we need to take on the form of a bondservant. Although we may be blessed with many things, we are still a debtor, and we have to show the world that we are a debtor. That this is not about consumerism. This is about falling down at the feet of Jesus and saying, thank you. It's not about me. It's all about Him. I think the question that is really relevant and the question I want to leave you with is this. Is God enough? Is He enough? If we had nothing but God, would that be enough? If that is all you had, could you still be content? Could you be satisfied? You know, I think about Job. And I think how in the beginning Job lost everything. He lost his family, he lost his wealth, all his possessions. And here's what it says. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and he worshiped. He said, naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And through all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. I got to be honest with you. If I lost my children and my possessions, I don't know that my first reaction would be to fall on my knees and fall on my face before God. But that's what Job did. And you know why? Because God was enough. In that moment, God was enough. That doesn't mean that he wasn't sorrowful. That doesn't mean that he didn't mourn the loss of his children. It simply means that he had his faith in the right place. And therefore, at the end of the day, he could praise God. Is God enough for you? You know, it's easy to say when we have a lot of stuff, right? It's easy for us to sit here in our blessed life and say, yeah, sure, God's enough. If I lost it all, I'd still love Him. Are we a diva or are we a debtor? Folks, we're not entitled to anything. And in fact, if you really think about it, you know what we deserve? Hell. But thanks be to God, we don't have to endure hell because He sent His Son. As the communion focus talked about this morning, as Isaiah 53, He sent His Son so that we didn't have to endure the fires of hell, but rather we can enjoy the glory of the presence of God forever. Let us not be me-focused. Let us be God-focused, and let's remember the order. Don't turn the tables here. You're the slave, not the master. And if we can help you this morning, we want to. If you're a child of God and maybe you need prayers and support of this church family because you've drifted off course, then let us help you. If you're not a child of God and you're ready to put on Christ in baptism, then why wait on that? Whatever your need is, come now as we stand and as we